coming out. This is the last actual lecture as part of Hello World. Just a reminder, we will meet on Monday for office hours. There's some project assignment work, some homework that'll come out of this class, so you'll have a chance to get help from mentors on Monday for that. So sort of the last time we're hanging out, but sort of not also. So before we get started, I want to let you know about something that's happening here at the exact same time next week. So since you've already got this time carved out in your calendar, 1:30 to 3:30 on Saturdays, we have a free credit and money management workshop that's being run by Operation Hope. So that's next week, and so I encourage you all to come out, and I'm going to let Marina from Operation Hope say a few words about what they do and what you can expect next Saturday at that workshop.
Good afternoon, everyone. So like he said, my name is Marina Baleri. I'm a financial management counselor at Operation Hope. And so you might be thinking, I've spent enough Saturdays in this room. It's starting to get nice out. Why would I want to spend another Saturday in this room? But just a few quick things. Who here has already seen their credit report or their credit score? Who's looked at that before? All right, so there's a few people. For those of you who haven't, your credit score and your credit report is one of the most important things for your financial future. Another question, how much money do you think you can save an average person over the course of their life by having an excellent credit score rather than a poor credit score? Just like Sam. Millions? Oh, you're really enthusiastic. It's not $1 million. Yeah, if you wanted to spend. So average person, we're talking house, maybe a few cars, that sort of thing. How much money do you think you can save? 100,000, 10 grand a year. Other guesses? Not, wow, you're very pessimistic. Not $10. So it's $250,000. The Annie E. Casey Foundation figured out that a excellent credit score can save you $250,000. So the reason I'm asking you to come to a workshop next Saturday, giving up one more Saturday, is because I'm going to go over basically everything you need to know to be able to manage your credit and have excellent credit yourself. I'm going to talk about budgeting, money management, how your credit score is calculated, how to dispute errors on your credit report. So for those of you who have heard the advertisements about the credit repair agencies that will like charge you an arm and a leg to get you perfect credit, you can do all that for free by yourself. And I will provide you with all the tools that you need to be able to do that. Let's see, what else am I going to go over? Identity theft. And I will, by attending this workshop, I will be able to pull a free credit report for you with a score. And that's a soft pull, so that is not going to impact your credit adversely at all. So if that's something you're interested in, Chris is going to email out my information and you can RSVP for that workshop. Are there any questions for me about this opportunity? All right, I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you next Saturday. Thanks.
Right, so we've done a couple of them, these workshops with Operation Help already, and they're really great. And just personally, I actually like in the middle of a fraudulent credit report issue that they're helping me with. So that's pretty awesome. So I can speak firsthand about they know what they're doing. Okay, so let's see. Today's agenda, our last class, we don't have any slides, so I just kind of wrote out some notes here to give you an idea of what we're doing. We're going to start off with the big question that I told you we'd answer, which is how to get a job, what to do next. And so I'm going to walk through all those steps. Then we do have a continued lesson on our path to getting in the world of JavaScript and being able to be a web developer. We're going to talk about how the internet works and how JavaScript runs within web pages. So if you did the prep work for the class, some of that was oriented towards this. It talked a little bit about HTML and CSS and what those things are. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and I'll show you how to actually use a browser and access some of the tools within the browser that a developer might use, or you as a developer will use, to code within the browser, to debug and to assess different browser behaviors of web pages. And then we're also going to look at a specific example, a big project that we put together that we're going to walk through it and see how it works. And then at the end of the day, you're going to have as a homework assignment, you're going to have the opportunity to add on, customize, tweak that project in one of several ways, or you come up with your own way to tweak the project. So that's kind of where we're going today. All right, so what is LaunchCode? So I think Crystal Martin talked a little bit about this back at the beginning of the class. This is an old slide next up. I'm going to tell you what's out of date and what's up to date. But here generally what LaunchCode is, just to reiterate now that you've been here for a few Saturdays, LaunchCode is a nonprofit. We've been around for 2 years, a little over 2 years actually. And our mission is to create pathways to economic opportunity and upward mobility through apprenticeships and job placements in technology. That's a lot of words. What does it mean? It means we help people get tech jobs. That's our primary mission. So we do classes. We do this class. We do Coder Girl. We do CS50. We do all those things. But the reason we do those is to help get people ready to be able to get a job. We're not just doing this just because we like coding and we want to do cool free stuff for the community. That's all cool. But at the end of the day, we do this because it helps people get closer to jobs and it helps people become job ready. So not everybody that goes through our classes will at the end of the day get a job. That's okay. Not everybody wants a job. Some people start out in a class, get halfway through it, realize it's more work than they want to do, or it's not for them, or it's personal life situations get in the way, they move, whatever. That said, a lot of the people that do go through our programs do actually get jobs. And so what we do is we try to break down HR sort of hiring practices and break down the walls that might be in the way between you and a tech job. If you don't have a computer science degree, how many people here have a computer science degree? Didn't think so. You probably wouldn't be here. So a lot of employers have that as a requirement to a tech job. We can get past that requirement. How many of you here have 3 to 5 years experience being a Java developer? Right. That's another requirement that a lot of Java shops will have for you just to get an entry-level job. Seems kind of paradoxical, right? 3 to 5 years of experience for an entry-level job. The problem is it's so competitive of a hiring environment. This is why they do this. And they also, HR departments they're just structured by nature. So we break down those walls. We provide ways for you to get in the front door at a company without having those things on your resume. So the way it works generally is once you go through an evaluation process with LaunchCode. So once you feel like you're ready to get a job, and we can help you determine whether or not you're ready or not, there's an evaluation process. You go to our website, and at the very top of our website is the apply button that will let you apply to be a LaunchCode apprentice. And that's a multi-step process. The first part is just going through a web form, just getting some information about who you are, your employment history, what you've done to gain skills, etc. There's also an online coding test that we give you to see what your skills really are. So just to kind of get some idea of where your skills are. It's not like super crazy hard. It's not like you have to get a certain score or we'll never talk to you. It's just an indicator. What are your skills like? We just want some rough idea. And then after that, if we think you look pretty decent, we'll do an in-person interview with you just to see who are you as a person. Why do you have the drive? Do you have the aptitude? Do you have the desire to work really hard and take advantage of this opportunity? Can we sell you to an employer? Because that's at the end of the day what we're doing. The way we break down these HR barriers is by selling you to an employer and saying, this person, they didn't have a CS degree, they didn't even finish college, but they're really great. They've done all these coding things on their own. They built this awesome project. They've been working their butt off for the last 2 years, and they're really good. And we say that we put our name on them to say that this person is going to be a good employee, because that's what we have to offer to employers is our reputation. So and that's essentially what we do. So we've gotten to date. Let me go back to the slide deck. We've gotten to date. These are a bunch of numbers about LaunchCode. That says 250. This is as of at some point like late summer, almost 350 jobs in the last 2 years we've gotten for people. Most of those are in St. Louis. There are a few in Miami, probably 75-ish in Miami where we have another office. So just some other metrics around what that looks like. So you go into an apprenticeship. It's 90 days apprenticeship. You get paid $15 an hour. Okay. These aren't internships. Does anybody know what headcount means? That term, is that familiar to anybody? Headcount is like HR speak for this is a role that we have to fill permanently. Okay. Internships don't have headcount. It's like, hey, you're an intern, come in, maybe we'll pay you. At the end of the summer, sorry, it's not a real job, so go away. Thanks for your work. That's what an internship. An apprenticeship has headcount, which means at the end of the day, they need to fill that role and they're planning on filling it, and you're testing out to fill that role. So all of our apprenticeships have headcount, which means it's a permanent role that they're going to eventually hire for. And as the apprentice, you're testing out yourself out for that role. 90 days, $15 an hour. At the end of that, they decide whether or not to keep you based on that trial period. During that trial period, you get matched with somebody within the company, a more senior person, usually a senior developer on your team that will kind of help you continue to learn. We realize that programmers are always learning. So especially early on in your career, we acknowledge it's really super important to have a sort of on-staff mentor for you. So the companies we work with will pair you with somebody to help you through that 90-day apprenticeship and kind of be your guide. And 90% of the people that we put into apprenticeships get hired full-time. Okay, that's pretty remarkable. The average starting salary for those folks is $50,000. It's just pretty cool overall. So you can look at the bottom, 42% of the people that we've gotten jobs for don't have a degree. 18% have a degree in computer science, but are still having trouble getting a job. And then 40% have a degree in a different field. So that's kind of the breakdown of the people we work with. And so these numbers are a little out of date, like I said, but still somewhat accurate picture of the type of situation with LaunchCode. So I'm going to play a short video for you, and then just kind of open it up to questions about the LaunchCode process. And then we'll go talk more about how to get those skills, how to get which classes you need to take, how long it's going to take, etc. Okay.
I would describe LaunchCode as an opportunity to show yourself.
LaunchCode is a catalyst.
They've created the opportunity.
At LaunchCode, we're aiming to fulfill the dreams of everyone who aspires to work in technology and has the drive, skills, and just needs the opportunity to prove themselves. The problem we're trying to solve has two pieces. There are millions of people who are unemployed, underemployed, or stuck in cycles of low-wage job after low-wage job. At the same time, companies face a massive talent and experience gap. It's estimated that by 2020, over 1 million jobs in computer programming alone will go unfilled. For good technology jobs, you typically need a college degree and 3 to 5 years experience just to get an interview. This makes it basically impossible for the average person to land one of these jobs. What ends up happening is companies shuffle employees between jobs while great candidates are stuck on the outside looking in.
And part of that is because it's very difficult to navigate all the on-roads to get the sort of job you want.
Before LaunchCode, I was serving tables.
I was doing customer service.
In school and trying to piecemeal together a career.
Now, the cool thing about being a programmer is that a lot of your knowledge is self-taught. So even the best programmers who've been through school are learning most of the stuff themselves.
The hard part is there isn't a pathway that leads from that education or wherever you acquired that knowledge to a job. LaunchCode paves that pathway.
Companies say that they need workers. Potential workers say we need jobs. LaunchCode matches those individuals with those job opportunities.
LaunchCode has negotiated with hundreds of companies a special on-road for you to showcase your skills.
These on-roads take you past traditional barriers like fancy degrees or work experience and let you show off your potential. This is also great for companies because it de-risks the hiring process.
It's very, very, very hard to find people right now, especially talented people. And we know that the LaunchCode people are very talented because they've been pre-vetted for us.
We can make sure that we're getting the people that really have a passion and want to learn more about the technology that we're using.
It turns out that 90% of the time people are staying on within their companies.
As a company, you're looking for those opportunities to add new ideas. And bringing someone from a LaunchCode background who's getting into the industry, bringing that diversity of thought is a great way to infuse that into the organization.
Companies that care about their communities are hiring from their communities, and LaunchCode is a way to do that.
From no high school degree to masters in computer science, what ties everyone together is LaunchCode can help them get where they want to be.
After getting with LaunchCode, I was meeting with the VP of a major international company.
If I had just applied to programming jobs, you'll be like, no, what?
I've got my career. I can't even put that into words. It's great.
That's groundbreaking. You know, it's a game changer.
To me, it's just about opportunity to learn code full time and I get paid for it.
LaunchCode was a trapdoor I fell through into my dream job.
LaunchCode completely changed my life.
Every day we meet people who have the drive, skill, and aptitude to succeed. They just need the opportunity. LaunchCode gives that to them.
Cool. So that's kind of how LaunchCode as an organization works in terms of getting people jobs. So before I kind of give you the kind of different options for your next steps, if that's the path you want to move towards, who has questions about what that looks like and what LaunchCode does and all those things? I know somebody does. Sorry. Yeah, in the back. So the question is about tech jobs. Does the hiring go through temp services? The answer is typically no, for programming jobs at least. So this is let me say that too. When we're LaunchCode deals primarily with computer programming jobs and sort of related, so project managers, QA testers, quality assurance testers, database analysts, business intelligence employees, things like that. So not like networking analysts or not hardware people. Most of those jobs are not actually hired through temp services. Sometimes at the creative agency level, like a marketing agency, sometimes they'll bring on like a web developer in a sort of temp job way. There's like Creatives for Hire is an organization that does stuff like that. But in general, no. So if you're talking about like Express Scripts, MasterCard, Boeing, those people hire directly. Sometimes they'll go through recruiters to find good people. So the recruiters, will charge the company, say 10% of the person's starting salary or something like that, or some flat fee to find the person. So that's a common thing in the field. Any other questions? Yeah. So the question is about work from home. So that does happen sometimes. For the most part, though, most of the apprenticeships are not work from home, and the reason is what I mentioned earlier, which is that you're generally in this environment, you're kind of paired with a staff mentor who's going to work with you closely on a regular basis. And so it's a much better, it has happened at LaunchCode. We have placed apprentices that have been work from home, but initially, at least in your apprenticeship, 98% shot, you're going to be working on site. Now, a lot of programming jobs do allow a lot of flexibility. Some of them will eventually allow you to work from home full or part-time. I used to be a software developer at AT&T. I worked from home 2 days a week. That is a very common thing eventually, but during the apprenticeship, that's usually not a factor. Yes. It's a great question. I can't answer that question with specifics. I can answer it with sort of broad strokes. So the question is, what do the different types of programming jobs look like with respect to, say, pay, job availability, et cetera? So broadly, let me approach it this way. So we kind of talk about two big broad categories of jobs here at LaunchCode, sort of jobs that are much more what you would call object-oriented enterprise development. So this is like doing Java or C# programming. This generally happens at large companies. So this is what I did at AT&T. This is what happens at like MasterCard, Boeing, Express Scripts, these big companies. Those jobs are going to be of a certain style, right? You're going to work about 40 to 45 hours a week pretty strictly. You're going to have really solid benefits. You're going to have very stable job opportunities. You're going to work within a large company in a corporate environment on a big team with very specific, a very specific corner carved out for you. Web stuff tends to be in like startups, creative firms, and those types of companies. Small to mid-sized companies tend to hire more web developers. And so within the realm of web development, there's a huge sort of rainbow of different skills. There's front end, there's back end, there's full stack, there's even within those, there are different languages. So like you might have heard of Ruby on Rails and JavaScript and Python. These are all different types of web development skills you can have. And so what I can say right now is that those are all out there. If you really, really, really want to do Ruby on Rails, you can find, we'll try to find a job for you in St. Louis doing that. And that'll probably be at a smallish company. Now, Ruby on Rails is not a very popular language for companies in St. Louis for some reason. It's pretty popular across the country, not in St. Louis. So if you're learning, we'll probably say, you probably want to learn, say, JavaScript and be a full stack JavaScript developer. That's a better sort of that's going to give you more options when you're looking at jobs as a web developer. And so, yeah, does that kind of, I mean, there's a lot of different variables and factors there. And I couldn't tell you, our company team could tell you exactly like what they have now. That's what people come to them and say, we want to hire a person with these skills. And so that's kind of where we get that information, is directly from those people. And this is generally what they tell me. So is that specific enough, at least? Okay, yes. Yeah, so big companies, small companies. I mean, if you go to our website and look at partners, these are companies that have either hired from us or have agreed to hire, and we just haven't like found, they haven't had an opening that we've needed to fill, but they said, yes, when we have an opening, we'll come to you. So you can see Anheuser-Busch, huge company. 501c Creative, very small company that does nonprofit websites. Better Weekdays, a startup downtown at the T-Rex building. Burger King, pretty big. Bullhorn, medium size. So Brian Cave is a law firm. There's a huge variety of companies that we work with. Yeah. And so that's another aspect. We're not going to just say, come in and have you interview and then be like, okay, here's your job. We're going to work with you to find the right fit of company, skills, even something like location. If you've got, if you live in like O'Fallon, Illinois, and you've got 3 kids, we're not going to like send you to MasterCard because the commute's going to kill you. It's not going to be a successful situation for you. We want everybody to be successful, so we try to make sure it's a good match in all ways. Front row here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So you tell us your preferences and we'll work with those. And you still interview with the companies themselves. So the job interview aspect of that still happens. It's not us just kind of blindly putting you in there. You'll still interview, you'll get a feel for what the company's like, et cetera. You still have the right to say, you know what, that interview, like the culture didn't kind of, I don't think I'm going to be happy here. I don't want that job even if they offer it to me. There's still that back and forth. You still have the choice and we'll work with you to make sure your preferences are part of that. For finding a job on your own, or like learning. So we'll talk in a minute. I'll talk about all the different learning opportunities that are available and kind of separate that from the job stuff and kind of go in detail. Oh, totally different question that I'm probably not even qualified to answer. Sorry. Second row. IT security, it's going to give you some good skills. You're still going to need a lot more and a different set of skills. So having a good knowledge of programming, especially CS50 is taught in C, which is a good language to know for IT security, but generally it's pretty much a separate but parallel field for the most part. Was there a question over here? Yes. So the question is, what roles are large companies working for, and do we do government job placements? Large companies, it's all over the map. So we've had people, earlier in the year we had Boeing hire like 12 people in one day from us. Those were project managers, they were testers, they were software developers, all tech oriented, all jobs where knowing how to code is either required or a big plus, but a decent variety. And then for government jobs, we do work with certain government agencies, not every government agency. Government hiring is kind of a weird, tricky world if you've ever encountered it. We've placed people at the Federal Reserve Bank, for instance. We're working with St. Louis County to do placements with the county. So those are there. They're kind of like less common than most of our jobs, just because there aren't as many development jobs in government, at least in St. Louis. If you go to DC, there's probably a lot more. And also the hiring process, the HR practices in government jobs are kind of weird and tricky and hard to navigate and different from normal. But yeah, the only instance I know in St. Louis is the Federal Reserve Bank. We have placed people at the Federal Reserve Bank. Does that make? Sure. I mean, so in general, like you're talking about like a federal job at NGA. I don't know if we've placed anybody at NGA, for instance. I don't know. I can't answer that question. So yes. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on how much time you have to work, what your kind of natural aptitude is. What I've been telling people and what a lot of other people in LaunchCode say is a good ballpark is 300 to 500 hours of learning time. Mm-hmm. Sure. No, you never pay LaunchCode anything. Never. Ever. In the back first, actually, she had her hand raised first. Yep, certainly. Mm-hmm. That's part of our in-person, when we do in-person interviews with you, we'll kind of, that's one thing you're evaluated on is how does your resume look? How is your interview? Here are things you should talk about more in your interview. Here are things you should talk about less. Here's how to present yourself. Here's how to dress when you go to this type of company. Those things are as important as what's your coding skills in a lot of cases. So we do work with people a lot on that. And even in this facility, we're doing more and more because we have the space to do a lot more soft skills programming. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we will. Right. So if for some reason that match, when I say 90% of the people stay, get converted to full-time employment after the apprenticeship, that 10%, a big chunk of those are just situations where like it didn't quite work out. Maybe they took an apprentice and said, oh, we need a JavaScript developer, but this person doesn't know JavaScript. We'll teach them, and that sort of teaching, maybe that didn't quite go as well as they wanted to, or maybe whatever can happen. It's not a situation where like the person was fired necessarily. We've only had like very, very rarely where there's like a situation where there was a stark issue. It's usually some kind of misfit that we then go try to find you a better placement. So if there are any other questions about the apprenticeship piece, I'll answer those after, because I want to get moving and talking about education stuff, and then also about today's lesson, obviously, because that's why we're here, is to learn to code, right? So education-wise, just close the tab. Learn is kind of the main area for the educational programs that LaunchCode offers. Let me start by saying, you don't have to go through one of our classes to get a job placement through LaunchCode. We're agnostic about where you learn to code. We don't care. If you want to go to some for-profit boot camp and pay them, you want to go to community college and do that, whatever you want to learn online and whatever you want to do, we don't care. If you have the skills, we're not going to treat you differently if you didn't go through one of our programs, or if you did. All we care about is your ability. So that said, here's what we can offer you. All of our programs, in St. Louis at least, are free. So hello world, you're here. LaunchCode's CS50X, we've talked a little bit about that. That's a 16-week class that uses Harvard's Intro to Computer Science curriculum. It's hard. It's good. If you get through that and build a project afterwards, you'll be ready for a job. But it's hard. The plan right now is to do 2 CS50s a year, so one in the spring, one in the fall, kind of aligned with college semesters. We'll also have, we'll likely have some other similar classes in the summer, which I can't really say much about because this is all being kind of worked out right now. So there's likely going to be something like CS50 or CS50-like that you can do in the summer here or at another location in St. Louis offered by LaunchCode. So just to that point, let me say that I'll send these links out to Piazza. But if you go to the Mentor Center page, newsletter link here, out. But if you sign up for that newsletter, you'll get information about new classes as we announce them. So I can't tell you what's going to happen in the summer. Something will happen this summer. I can't tell you what it is, but if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll find out as soon as anybody does. Yes. We had 250 seats for CS50 for the spring. The question is, how challenging or competitive is it? We had 250 seats. We got close to 1,000 applications. So that should tell you something. There is an assessment you take. It's not the only thing that's determined. It's not coding based at all, because obviously most of the people that come to CS50 haven't coded ever. But it's about problem solving, logic, problem solving skills. So those kinds of things. That's part of it. It's not a pass fail thing. If you kind of do like medium or not so well, it doesn't mean we're not going to think you're a good potential candidate for CS50. It just gets factored in with all of the stuff. Something we consider. So CS50, so like I said, there will likely be something like CS50 in the summer. The Harvard class is 12 weeks. We add 4 onto that to give you a chance to learn what you might call a more marketable skill. You learn the programming language C is the primary programming language in CS50. Nobody hires C programmers really anymore, unless you're like Apple or Microsoft. But it's a really, really good language to learn in. And once you know C, you can then go learn like 10 or 12 other languages really easily. So we teach you in C for the first 12 weeks-ish, and then after that, we teach you a skills track. So web development or Java are the 2 skills tracks. So you'll spend 4 weeks learning, getting off the ground in those areas, and then you'll build a project to kind of show off your skills and have something that you can show to an employer and say, here's something I built by myself of my own volition. It's not a homework assignment. It's not something somebody told me or walked me through. It's something I built, and that's a big selling point. So that 12 weeks plus 4 weeks is how we run CS50. It's a little bit different than what you would do online. Because you can't take CS50 online through edX by yourself. Coder Girl is a weekly meetup. So it's a meetup, not a class. There's no lecture. There's no like single cohesive curriculum. It's a meetup that's designed for women. It's predominantly women. That said, we don't turn anybody away. There are male mentors and there are male learners there. And there are different groups. There's a web group, there's a database group, there's a Java group, there's a beginners group, there's a Python group. So you can come into that group and even as a relatively new programmer, find a place and a group to work with and have people that will kind of give you, put you on a learning track and will support you on that learning track. And that happens every Wednesday, 6 to 8, also free, obviously. And then something that we are going to be starting similar to Coder Girl in some ways is Mentor Mondays. So the 5:30 to 8 p.m. time slot that we've been using for office hours for this class, we're just going to keep going with that and invite anybody that wants to come in and get started coding into that meetup. So it's just going to be a meetup with mentors that can support Hello World or CS50 kind of level stuff. You can continue to work on Codecademy stuff. You can, we'll have other learning tracks if you want to do some HTML and CSS after playing with JavaScript and kind of combine those things. We'll have a learning track for that. If you want to start on CS50 on your own while you're waiting for the next one to open up, you can do that. We'll have 2 or 3 learning tracks that'll be sort of, we can point you down and we'll have mentors that can help you out on those learning tracks. But generally, if you have something you want to work on and get help, that's a good place to come to. And that's meant to keep you engaged between now and then the time we have a class for you to sign up and get in. We don't want to just push you out the door and tell you to come back in the fall or whatever. We want to keep you engaged and help you keep learning. And just one note on that, I put starting 4/11. I'm going on vacation next week, so I will not be here. So we're going to skip the 4th. April 4th, which would be the first Monday after this class. Yes, question. We really don't have mentors that know IT security very well. So if we did, I would say yes. Basically, what we're able to support has to do with our mentors. We don't have like even a full-time person on staff that does education. That's not like, it's not my primary job. So our mentors are the primary people that support the learning of. It's a community-based learning model. So. Let's see, anything I missed. There is a web development class from Blue 1647, who's one of our partners, and that's going to be a 13-week HTML, CSS, and JavaScript class that starts at the end of April. That'll meet 4 nights a week for 13 weeks, and that you can sign up for that now if you're really interested in that stuff. The pace of that class is probably a little bit slower than if you wanted to get. It's not going to get you job ready. That class isn't. You're going to have to take something beyond that or keep working significantly beyond that. But it's a good kind of halfway there sort of course. So that one is something you can sign up for now. Sure. Yep. Okay, so if you have any other questions about educational opportunities through LaunchCode or otherwise, or the apprenticeship stuff, talk to me after class, and I'll be more than happy to answer those. But now we're going to learn more about coding. So last week we learned about, we sort of dove in deeply around functions and arrays and just sort of kind of rounded out all the core aspects of both JavaScript and programming. JavaScript has a lot more going on, programming has a lot more going on, but right now the concepts that you've learned, variables, data types, loops, conditionals, if-else statements, functions, arrays, that is like if you had to ask a programmer, what are like the basic things that every programmer needs to know? That's probably what they would tell you, okay? So we've got all of those solid foundational skills. If you wanted to go learn a different language tomorrow, you would see these same concepts in a slightly different shape, but you would see these same concepts in pretty much any other programming language you're going to learn, okay? So we've tried to focus on the universal aspects of these pieces of programming rather than the JavaScript specific stuff. So today we're going to talk and integrate this JavaScript knowledge into the real world, basically. JavaScript is the language that was built to run in web browsers, was built to be a part of web pages. We're going to see how that actually works. We're going to see how JavaScript actually runs in web pages and some examples of things you can do with it. And then we're going to look at a little project and walk through that and give you a chance to play around with some JavaScript in a web page yourself for homework. So, did everybody watch the prep work, or some of it at least, around the web? HTML, CSS, how the web works? We're going to review a little bit of this. And I'm going to do, I might just have to turn this off. Nope, that worked. I'm going to do a little bit at the whiteboard here. I'm going to use the microphone this time so that it is on the recording for people that aren't here. Or you later when you want to watch it at home. Okay, so the internet, we all interact with the internet pretty much every day, but how does it really work? We're just going to talk about some fundamentals, some really basic stuff, and I'll wave my hand a little bit. But this will give you a general picture. So the internet generally works by you as a user being on a laptop or a computer. You have a web browser open, and in that web browser, you type in some address. LaunchCode.org, you've all been there. It's how you sign up for this class. You type in that address and you hit enter. All right, what happens at that point in time? Well, the browser makes a request from a server somewhere in the world. Okay, so there's a server. We'll say it's over here. I don't know. I think our server's in Texas, maybe. I'm not sure. But it doesn't really matter. There's some server in the world that hosts launchcode.org, the website. So there's a request. The browser then, there's some stuff that happens in between there. How does the browser know where that server is? There's some address stuff going on, stuff we're gonna kind of wave our hand at. If you're curious about it, I'm happy to talk more about the web stuff because I think it's really cool. How this turns into the address of a server, how it finds that server wherever in the country it is, we're kind of brushing over that. But it goes to that server and says, hey, give me your homepage. Launchcode.org is just the homepage, right? There's no /learn, there's no /mentor center. Give me the homepage, okay? The server does whatever it does, depending on, this is kind of where, to the user, this is kind of a black box. The server can have that homepage kind of already made up and already packaged and ready to send off. It might need to generate the homepage. It might need to run a program and go to a database and do a bunch of things to generate that page before it sends back to you. Whatever happens there is a black box to us. But that's what the person who built, the people who built launchcode.org, the programmers, they're the ones that were responsible for that. So it does something, and it sends back the homepage. You might call this index.html in a response. Okay, so this response will contain just a bunch of code. It's just text, basically, and I'll show you. We're going to actually look at some of these responses in the browser in a minute, but this contains a bunch of code, and it contains usually 3 different types of languages. 2 static languages, and then a 3rd programming language. So the 3 languages that are typically contained in a response are HTML, CSS, and what we've learned, JavaScript. It might also contain, well, it doesn't, you might also get images and things like that, but those are it's kind of complicated. Those are actually separate requests. But this is what comes back. This will come in as just a single blob of text, basically, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. So it's then the browser's job over here to take this big blob of stuff and to turn it into something that looks nice. And so that's what a browser does. This is why, have any of you been around long enough to use Internet Explorer 6, and you might see websites that say, hey, this is not compatible. Browsers treat things, web pages, in different ways. They render them in different ways. So this is sometimes the bane of a web programmer's existence, because you have to program a web page that has to work on every conceivable browser in the universe, potentially. Now, in practice, we just kind of ignore some of them and call them stupid. But it needs to work on most of the browsers that our users are going to use, right? We don't have control over that browser, how it builds our page. What we do have control over is what we send it. We do have control over the code that we send back from our server. So as the programmer, you're going to write code over here. And then when a browser loads it, it's going to pull it in and then run the code. So the JavaScript, so these pieces get rendered. Rendered is just the term for taking that HTML and CSS, that static code, and turning it into something visual. And then this will get executed. Sometimes it gets executed right away as soon as that page is built. Sometimes it gets executed in response to the user doing something, like clicking on a button or scrolling down the page. It all depends on how the code's written. But the JavaScript that we're going to write will actually run inside the web browser. So that's where we're primarily going to look at it and look at how it interacts with the web page. Any questions about this picture? Cool. All right. Just one more thing. This is called HTTP. So if you look around the internet and you're curious about it, HTTP is how these things talk back and forth. So HTTP request, HTTP response. These are letters we're going to see a lot more of today. Okay. So that's basically, in a very brief high-level summary, how the internet works. Web browsers make requests. They ask for information from servers. Servers send it back. Programmers are the ones that determine what gets sent back over to the user and runs in the browser. Okay, so let's look at the user side of that. Let's look at the what happens in a web browser. Ooh, shoot. All right. Let's go over here so we don't get sick from the nesting windows. So let me just go to launchcode.org. Request to that server, it sent back the home page. There's some nice tools. These did not used to exist when I started doing web development. They were kind of rare. They were like plugins. Some browsers didn't let you do it at all, really, like Internet Explorer. But there are these tools that are built into pretty much every modern web browser that let you see the things that a developer would want to see. In Chrome, I'm going to use Chrome just because I think it's a good kind of common browser. When I do web stuff, I tend to prefer Firefox. But for this class, at least, I'm going to recommend that you use Chrome, so we're all kind of on the same footing. If you go to Chrome and you go up to your three little bar menu up there and go to More Tools, there's something down here called Developer Tools. And that's going to pop open a window. When it pops open for you, it might look like this. It's kind of like default location. And this window gives us a view into the guts of the web page and what's happening right now. So let's just look at a few things. First, let's just look at what happens when I make a request. So I just refresh the page. This tab is currently showing me all of the requests that are going across the network. So the first request at the top there, it's kind of small, might be hard to see. It says launchcode.org. That is my browser asking launchcode.org for something in return. All right, so I can actually look at the guts of this request. So headers, these are what the request headers are down here. Here's what my browser sends to the server when it asks for the home page. It sends a bunch of kind of seemingly cryptic information, but it's how the web browser knows what I'm looking for, that I'm looking for the home page as opposed to one of the other pages that it might have. That's all down here. Response headers are something that the server sends back to tell the browser, hey, here's some meta information about the stuff I just gave you. The response itself is also right here. So this is literally what got sent back, verbatim, line for line, character for character, got sent back from the LaunchCode server. There's a lot of stuff there that we don't really know how to look at. But if you did some of the prep work or if you've done some web coding before, you recognize this as what? What are we looking at here? We're looking at HTML, right? So I said there are three components, primary components of a web page: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML is the guts, the structure, the kind of bones of the web page. It's what everything else kind of hangs off of. CSS, cascading style sheets, are the visual aspect of the web page. They're what give it the colors and the backgrounds and the font sizes and all these different things. And then JavaScript is code that interacts with it. So this one request, what we get back is HTML, but it actually kind of contains references to CSS and JavaScript within it. Let me show you. I have to lower this a little bit, specifically what I'm talking about. So look at line 6 here. Here's an example. That is an HTML tag. All these things are with the angle brackets in HTML are called tags. That's an HTML tag that refers to something blah, 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 dot CSS. That is a CSS file. So within that file, we'll look at some CSS and see what that looks like later. There are some rules about how the page should look. Okay, so our HTML contains references to the CSS that need to be pulled in. Right below it, on line 7, we have a script tag. And this has a file name, blah, 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 some gibberish, .js. You might guess, even though we haven't worked directly with JavaScript files yet, that that is indeed a JavaScript file, and it is. So that file, if we looked at it, would have code that would look somewhat familiar to us as JavaScript. So what we get back is HTML, and it in itself contains information about CSS and JavaScript that are used in the page. There are also ways to include CSS and JavaScript directly in the page itself, which is what we're going to do. So here's some JavaScript that's just right there, chunked into the top of the page. We don't have to put it in a separate file. The same thing with CSS. You can put CSS directly in your HTML files. You don't have to put it in a separate file. So we're not going to go really into that too deeply. Let's just do this. Let's go back to our page. And say I want to understand something. This is a good kind of thing to do now that you know a little bit about web programming. Go to some web page that you visit frequently and just look at it, look inside of it. So I might want to understand how this header and these links are built. I can use this little button down here. See this little arrowy button that I'm hovering over? It's called an inspect button in most browsers. And I can do it, I can hover over these things, and it'll give me information about each of those things. So apply, I'm hovering over apply. It tells me that this is some kind of syntax that we're not quite used to yet, but basically it's telling me that, hey, that's a link, which is, it's a hyperlink. It links to some other page. Here's how big it is. It's 80.5781 pixels by 62 pixels. And then there's margin, which is the green stuff around there, which if you get into HTML and CSS, you'll learn what margin is pretty quickly. But it's giving you some information about that stuff. If I go ahead and click on one of these, let's just go and click on the LaunchCode logo. It just threw me down to the thing that I clicked on, right? So I can, in the bottom here, I can hover over different tags, and it will highlight them for me so I can see kind of how the code corresponds to what's actually in the page. So this is a fun thing to do. It'll teach you a lot. So we can see that the LaunchCode logo is actually a link. All right. But what does it look like? Does it look like a link? Looks like a picture, doesn't it? I mean, it is a link. If I click on it, I go somewhere. But where's the picture? Any guesses? On the server is not a wrong answer. It is on the server. But how does this page know where that the logo should go there? I mean, the image does come from the server. So here, this is what CSS does. CSS, like I said, describes how our page should look. In this case, the way we've used this picture is as a background image right here. Can we see this down at the bottom right? On the right-hand side, I'm seeing the styles that are associated with that element that come from different CSS files. And the background image for that link is the LaunchCode logo. So the link itself doesn't have anything inside of it, just a link. But its background image is a logo. So it's kind of confusing at first, but that's how those things happen. And you can look at any of these elements. Let's go up to one of our apply link. And you can look on the right-hand side and see all of the styles associated with it. So we see here that the color of this apply link is something called #5C93CE, which we're going to understand what this means by the end of the day. We have font family Nexa, font size 13 pixels, font weight is 700, all these different things that specify how this looks. I can actually, another cool thing about developer tools is I can mess with these. I can say, let's make the link red. And it made the link red, right? You see that up the top? I can actually interact with this page. I can turn certain rules on and off and see what happens. That rule apparently makes text go from like capital case, first letter capitalized, the rest under lowercase, to all capital. That's a CSS rule. So you can just kind of learn about CSS and HTML at a really basic level by getting in there, poking around at stuff, playing with things. None of this is going to change like what's happening on the server. If I refresh the page, all those rules that I just made up, they just go away. It's all just kind of temporary. It just allows you to play with the web page as it exists. Okay. So that's about as far as we're going to talk about HTML and CSS. There's also JavaScript in the page as well. So in the developer tools, if you go to sources, you'll be able to see JavaScript. So here's just one window. Unfortunately, a lot of the times the JavaScript you're going to look at is going to look like this because it's been what's called minified. It's been like scrunched down and made really obscure looking to make the page loads faster. We'll jump over to the example for class and see exactly what this would look like in a more realistic setting. So let's see. Let me go here. So now I'm going to open up this project that we're going to walk through today and is going to be part of your homework. And let's see, where is it? Not what I wanted. I have Safari set up as my default browser. So, okay. So here's the web page we're going to be, or something like this that we're going to be working with for the next week or so as you work on your code. So this is, you remember I mentioned at the beginning, the first day of class, how there's a bunch of LED lights that are wired to the back of these glass blocks over here, kind of behind the basketball hoop. They're broken right now, but when they are fixed, they are connected to a small microcomputer that is programmable that we can write code for that controls the way those lights light up in different patterns and colors and whatever. So at night, when you're out from the street, it looks like just a big grid of pixels that are illuminated and can kind of be animated in different colors and different patterns. So I've basically created a virtual version of that in a web page that we can code ourselves using JavaScript. So just see what this looks like. I hit start, it turns on the lights, and it just goes cycles kind of through blue and white, LaunchCode colors. Again, stop, and it stops. So let's dig into the code here and see what's making this work. Okay, so here is the file, the HTML file that I'm viewing right now. So this is a much nicer file to read than the one from launchcode.org, right? Less messy, less stuff. You can kind of, we're not gonna go and learn HTML, but you can poke around here and kind of guess what things are doing. This is the head of the document. This is stuff that's about the page. It doesn't actually get displayed, but it includes things like, here's the style sheet, the CSS rules for the page. The body of the document is the stuff that actually gets rendered on the screen. And so the actual HTML that's in there is pretty minimal. There's really only a few things here. This handful of things that are called divs with some buttons in the middle. What happens here is that there is some JavaScript that's building almost everything you're seeing on the page. And there are two pieces of it. There's some JavaScript that I've written for you to use for free that's in a file called controller.js. This little line of code pulls in that controller JavaScript code and lets you use it in your page. Okay? So you don't have to copy paste, whatever. You can just, each time you want to use it, you can just pull it in from that external location. And then what I have here is some JavaScript that's just literally right in the page. So from here, line 24 down to the close script tag, line 69, this is JavaScript that is just written directly in the page that gets run predominantly when the page loads. And so let me just show you how that works. Really, I can open up our developer tools. And so in your developer tools, I said before, our JavaScript lives under the sources tab. So here I can kind of browse the different components of my website. I've gone down here, basic8.html. This is going to show me the JavaScript that lives inside my page. And I can actually set what's called a breakpoint, which we're not, this is using in debugger, but we're not going to go into debuggers. But you'll see that I can actually look at, I've just stopped the browser on that line of code, and I can now control what's running. It just ran that line of code. It just ran that line of code. It just ran that function, build wall. It's doing a bunch of other stuff. I'm just going to let it run. So that code is running when the page is loading. We noticed that that code was running while there still wasn't stuff on the screen, right? The browser wasn't finished with its work of drawing the page. There's additional code that can then happen. This code here is going to run when I click the start button. I've just clicked start. None of the blocks have lit up. but I'm stopped at this line of code that I've set a breakpoint at, which is inside of something called the tick function. And we'll walk through that function and what it does in a minute. But this code is running in response to the user clicking on a button. Okay, so I mentioned before that JavaScript can run at different times. It can run when the page loads. It can run in response to a user action. It can be set on a timer to run at some certain time. This code is running in response to the user clicking on something. So we'll just let that play out. Okay, so we can also look at the JavaScript that you were given. It's down here in this controller.js file. How did I know where it was? From the HTML. The HTML tells me the JavaScript file is in this path. It's in ... means go one directory up, then go to the JavaScript directory, and then look for the file called controller.js. So my example file is right here. I go one directory up, I'm in this directory. I go down inside the JS directory, and then I look for the file called controller.js. So that's my controller.js code. So this code, let me remove breakpoints. This code is, there we go. Just plain JavaScript. There's nothing, no HTML, no CSS here. We'll look at this again in the code editor. But this is the stuff that I've written for you to use. And so we can see that, for instance, if I set a stop point there and I hit refresh on the page, we see that the build wall function is apparently running as the page is getting loaded, right? The page isn't fully loaded, but I've already stopped there. So apparently that function is running when the page is getting loaded. We can see that that's true because over here, I actually call the build wall function right away within my HTML page. All this code gets run as soon as the page loads. Okay, so I think that's pretty much everything in terms of how to see what's going on in the browser. So as you're writing JavaScript in a browser, you always want to have these developer tools open so you can look at things and see what's going on. There's also something useful called the console. So the console is pretty useful for the following reasons. If I have a problem with my code, let me just go to that array and get rid of one of the brackets, right? We saw that that's going to break our code based on syntax. If I refresh the page, I get an error here in my console. So remember the console.log that we've been using to print stuff out? This is it. This is where that goes. This is where that gets printed, is in the console. So I get an uncaught syntax error expression, unexpected string, doesn't really mean anything to me as a human, but it tells me that it's on line 35 of basic.html. Well, let me go look at line 35. Oh, lo and behold, that's where my error is. So if things aren't working the way you want them to work, your console and look for errors is the first place to go. You can also do cool things in the console, like just like make up JavaScript. I can say var a equals 5, a plus plus, JavaScript commands and test them out there in the console itself. Cool. All right, so developer tools, there's a lot of complicated, confusing stuff in here, especially as you're just starting, but they're going to be your best friend in terms of understanding what's happening in the page while you're writing code for it. So I fix my error, refresh the page, there's my wall again. So let's go back. Well, let me take a second for questions. Any questions about what's going on at this point? It's okay? There's a lot of new stuff. I'm trying to this right here. This is just the JavaScript file, or sorry, this one in particular is the HTML file. This is the page that's getting loaded in the browser. So I'm just in an editor that lets me edit that. So this, I kind of, if you're not already comfortable with like Notepad or another editor, in the homework I encourage you to use this editor. It's called Atom. It works for both Mac and Linux, or Mac, Linux, and Windows. And it's just going to be better. Right now, you've been doing your coding in Codecademy's editor, right? So for this stuff, you're going to need to do it on your own computer. You're going to need to use an editor. You can use just Notepad if you want, or text edit on Mac, but you're not going to get nice things like syntax highlighting. It's called Atom. It's linked in the course website in the homework for today. So this is the HTML file that is getting loaded. In the title bar, browser, HTML. This is basic.html right here. Okay. So let's, do you feel like I need a break, folks? This is kind of like a longer lecture day. All right, just let me know if you do. Okay, we're going to keep going then. All right, let's look at what's actually happening here. So the controller file is written for you, and it has 3 functions. It has a function called build wall, set color, and clear. And you don't have to understand what this code is doing at all. You just need to know how to use them. So this project exists, where does it exist? It exists on a site called GitHub. All these links are on the page in the homework, so don't worry about it. A reference for and how this project works. So I've documented these controller functions here to show you, you don't need to know what they're doing. You don't need to understand code. You just need to know how to use them. And so how to use them is laid out right here. So the set color function takes 2 variables. It takes X, Y, and a string. And what we're told is that I can call set color, and it will go to the block at coordinates X, Y, and change its color to the given color. Okay? So if I say set color 1, 1, yellow. That's hard to see. Sorry about that. So I can just call that function in the console, in my own code, whatever I want to do, and it'll do the thing. So the way the wall works is the bottom left is coordinates 1, 1. It's like X, Y, the same way in math class. Y goes up, X goes to the right. So the block over here at the bottom right corner is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's got coordinate X coordinate 5, Y coordinate 1. This has X, Y coordinate 5, X coordinate 1, etc. So if I want to say color 5 red, red. So that's essentially how it works. Now it's a little bit more complicated in that the way CSS rules work with colors, they give you a lot of flexibility. So generally I can use certain like words like yellow, red, green, black, white, blue, cyan, and the browser knows what those mean, but it also understands a lot more complicated ways to specify colors. And so I can use color names. There are basically 4 different ways that you can specify colors for this function. You can use names, and there are certain names that it understands. If you make up your own name, it's not going to, carrot orange it's not going to understand that one, or the Crayola names, it's not going to understand those. It understands RGB. RGB and HSL are going to probably make sense to folks who have had graphic design experience or took smart classes in college. RGB stands for red, green, blue. It's a way of breaking down any visible color into 3 components: some amount of red, some amount of green, and some amount of blue, and then mixing those together. So the way color theory works, that's one way to create different colors. And so if I use this syntax, RGB 00255, each of these 3 numbers represents first red, then green, then blue. So 00255 means give me 0 red, 0 green, and the most blue you've got. So I can set these numbers between 0 and 255. If I go above that, it just ignores it. I can't use 1,000 as the blue. The maximum value I can use is 255. So what color would we think that would be? If I have 0 red, 0 green, and all blue, it's a bright blue. RGB 02550, that says give me 0 red, all of the green you've got, and no blue. That's a bright green. RGB 2550, that says give me all of the red and all of the green and no blue. Not as obvious what that color might be unless you took color theory, but that's yellow. Basically the opposite of green. Complementary color to green, right? Or to blue, rather. So, and so there's, where's the link? Here. So I put this link here, CSS colors reference, which goes through these in detail and gives you a lot of examples. And you can even just go to say CSS RGB colors. And you can get pages like this, which will give you different kind of combinations. So what is Cyan in RGB, it's 0, 255, 255. Neutral colors happen to be shades of gray, happen to have all three numbers the same, equal mixture. Kind of makes sense, right? So all zeros, what would we think that would be? Well, it's on the screen if you can find it, but all zeros means no of any color, which should be as dark as possible, that's black. All 255s means as much of every color as you can get, which means white. So white light, visible white light, is all different colors of light mixed together. So that's how you can specify colors using RGB. There are other ways to specify the colors here. For those briefly, hex is similar to RGB. It just uses these different codes. You're probably not going to want to use that for your homework, but you can read about it. It's kind of a more programmer-y kind of way to specify colors. And then HSL, which some of the exercises in the code are better done with HSL. HSL stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. And so it's just a way of breaking down a color into three different kind of components and mixing them together. So if one of the things that you can do is to say keep the saturation and lightness the same, and then to go through all the values of hue, and that'll be like cycling through the rainbow. So let me show you an example of that, actually. Oh, no, I don't have it. Let me show you what it would look like, though. So for the different examples, exercises that I recommend for you to do, I've made little animated GIFs so you can see what they actually look like. And so this one is using HSL to go through all the colors of the rainbow. So it started out at red and just gradually shifts. It's on green, then it's going to go to blue, indigo, violet, and then back around to red, just in gradual colors. So the way it does this is to look at that first component of the HSL color and gradually change that number while keeping the saturation and the lightness exactly the same. The hue is what changes the color. Okay? So all that to say, when I call my setColor function, I can use anything that's valid in terms of being a CSS color. So the CSS color reference tells you what's valid and shows you different options. I've given you different examples. We've seen some different examples. You can do whatever you want as long as it's a valid CSS color. If it's not, it's just gonna like choke and not do anything, basically. It won't, you know, it's not gonna be able to smartly figure out what you mean. If you say carrot orange, it'll just not do anything. So that's the way the setColor function works. There are two more functions. Clear has a single parameter, color, that I can either use or not. If I don't use it, if I call the function without the parameter, it will literally clear all the colors. It'll turn them all back to being clear again. I give it a parameter, them all color. Basically a way of turning every block in the grid a single color at once. If I leave out a color name, it just makes them clear. And the last function, which you generally won't have to call, but knowing how it works or that it's there is interesting. Build wall will build the wall of a given size. And so this just draws the wall on the screen. So let's just see how that actually does happen. Our code in our HTML file, and I'm going to go here and comment this out. All right, so that code, since it's inside of a comment, won't run now. Page of the wall. So that wall is being built by JavaScript. So again, you don't have to understand how that works. If you want to, go read the code. There for you. And so the way this code works, it uses we have these three functions to use. It's primarily going to use the setColor function and going to generate different patterns based on that. Okay? Any questions at this point? It's a good point to check in. Okay. So the way this works is I have a little variable called running. Look, what's the data type of this variable? It's a Boolean. It starts out being false. This is just to keep track of whether or not my lights should be currently on or animated. Okay, so when I load the page, they're off. If you look up above here, you can see that there's this, you could kind of guess what these two things were, right? I got the word start and the word stop. I got button tags. This is the code that generates these start and stop buttons. And here is the code that actually makes the thing run. So when I click on the start button, it's going to set my running variable equal to true. And then it's going to call the tick function. So tick, it's called tick because you want to think of that as a clock ticking, like a second. Every second it ticks, okay? As long as I'm supposed to be running. So I set running equal to true. I'm going to start my animation, and then I'm going to call tick. And tick then is going to tick once and do something, and then it's going to call itself and tick again. So tick will continually run. It's like starting a clock, starting a stopwatch. If I click on the stop button, it sets running equal to false. And how that actually stops the animation is contained down here in the bottom of the tick function. So to start my animation, I call tick. It does a bunch of stuff. And then at the bottom, before it ends, it says, hey, am I supposed to keep going? Am I still running? If I'm still running, this just says, run myself again in 100 milliseconds, or a tenth of a second. All right, so tick it's like you can think of this as a loop, or think of this again as the tick of a clock. This function is going to continually call itself every tenth of a second as long as that running variable is still true. If running, tick again. If running, tick again. If running, tick again. If, in the meantime, somebody, i.e. me, has gone up and clicked on that stop button and set that variable to false, the next time the tick function goes around, it's going to hit this conditional, and it's going to say, if running, no, somebody stopped me, so then I quit. I'm not going to call myself again. So you can think of tick as being sort of like a loop, but it's a function that's calling itself only if it's supposed to keep going, and it knows if it's supposed to keep going based on whether or not somebody's clicked the start and stop buttons. Okay, so that's how this all gets kicked off. That's why when I load the page, I don't get any animation until I click on start. And then once I hit stop, it stops. Pretty cool, huh? I think so. Yeah. Yes. Good question. So the question is, I define the tick function down below, but I'm using it up above. So there's basically the answer is here. There's kind of two potential answers, but the one real answer is that this code is just a string in some way until I click on the button. And then the browser says, let me take this string and turn it into JavaScript and try to run it. So this code isn't attempted to being run until I've clicked. If I was trying to run it higher up in the page, then that would potentially be a problem. However, in this case, it's also tends to be not a problem for other reasons. But well, this is just because it's in the HTML on click thing. If I had, say, JavaScript up here, I said tick, that could potentially be a problem, right? In this case, it's actually not because of a weird feature, not a weird, but just a feature of JavaScript, which is that if you write a function, remember how we talked about functions? You could write them in different ways. You could say var tick equals function. That was how Code Academy had you do it, right? And then I've been telling you to do it this way. And those are slightly different. If I do it this way, JavaScript will actually like parse the entire thing before it tries to run any code. So it already knows about this function before it tries to run anything else. But that's just like a quirk of the way this function was written. If I wrote var tick equals function, that would create a problem. So, and kind of subtle, if that went over your head, it's cool. And that's called hoisting. It means that the JavaScript interpreter hoists function definitions to the top of whatever it's doing. Good question. Any other questions right now? Okay, so we've seen that the tick function is the key to everything that's happening, right? When the tick function gets called, that's where I have my shot to change colors of things, okay? In this particular example, I've written code to just start at the bottom left, move left to right, go up, turn everything blue. When I get to the top, go back to the bottom, do the same thing, turning everything white. So let's see how that happens. What happens is within my tick function, every time I tick, think of this as a clock tick every 1/10 of a second, I'm going to call set color. And I'm going to use two different variables that I've created here, loc_x and loc_y. Those are just abbreviated for location x, location y. They start out being 1 and 1. So that's basically me defining these variables up above, says I want to start my animation at the bottom left corner. 1, 1 is going to be the first place I'm going to do anything. So the first time my tick function gets called, it says set color at 1, 1, which is the bottom left corner. And then what does it do? It looks here and tries to figure out what that is. That's an array. Colors is an array. So we learned about arrays last week. This array has two different values, blue and white. The thing in index 0 is blue. The thing in index 1 is white. And so that array is basically saying, here are the two possible values I'm going to use for animating my wall. And color index is just going to be a way for us to alternate between them. So I initially set it to 0, which means the first time I run through, it's going to pick out blue because it's at index 0. Colors, bracket color index. The first time is going to be colors, bracket 0. That's blue. That's the first thing in the array, okay? So the first time this runs, look at this. And blue, and that turns on the first square to be blue. Okay? Now, what do I need to do? Remember, we're still in the first time our tick function is run. I've just turned on the bottom left corner. I need to update the coordinates to say which one am I going to deal with next, right? Well, I'm going left to right, bottom to top. So if I'm at the bottom left corner, I need to move my x coordinate 1 over, right? So this is just some logic to kind of figure that out. So this basically says, remember, loc_x and loc_y mean where am I now? Wall width and wall height are the variables that determine how high and how wide they are. So if loc_x is less than the width of the wall, it means I'm not all the way over to the right yet. That means I can keep going to the right. Remember, I'm going left to right, top, bottom to top. So if I'm in some row and I haven't reached the end of that row, I'm just going to keep going. I'm just going to go to the next x coordinate. So I say loc_x ++. Else, that must mean we've reached the end of a row, right? If loc_x is equal to the width of the wall, that means the one I just turned on is at the end of a row. That means I need to go to the beginning of the next row above it. So I set my x coordinate equal to 1, and then I check to make sure I haven't reached the very top. If I'm at the top right corner, I need to go to the bottom left, not one more up, because there isn't one more up, right? Does that make sense? If I'm say at this square right here, I want to go up here next and turn that one on. But if I'm up here, I can't go up and left because there's nothing there. I need to go down and left all the way back to the bottom. So this code says, I want to go all the way to the left, but I only want to go up if I haven't reached the top of the wall. So if my y coordinate hasn't reached the top of the wall, I'm going to go one more row up. If it has, I'm going to go back to the bottom. Okay, so this is just how I go from left to right, bottom to top. So I set the next coordinate, and then I check and see if I need to actually update the next color. So this will be this. If I'm going back to the bottom left, then I need to update and go to the next color. So this kind of line of logic just says go to the next color in my array, and this is just set up. This could be 0 or 1, but this is set up so that I could actually do multiple colors. So let's do blue, white, green. The array. Let's figure that out. Watch. Oh, good. Whew. I was getting nervous when I do these things live. Okay, so I can add as many colors as I want. And we get it, right? And so it says go to the next color in the array is essentially what this line of code is, and it does that using some math, which you can. I'm not going to go through it line by or bit by bit, but you know enough to parse out what that line of code is doing. Cool. And then, as we said before, it checks and says, should I tick again? Should I keep going? If yes, then it's going to go around and then light up the next block. So that's essentially what's happening. Every time one of these blocks is turned on, it's one call to that tick function. Think of it conceptually as one loop. Okay? I know there are questions. This is hard. Right? It's a lot of stuff. So let me ask you some questions then to see if you really understand what's kind of happening. So your job is going to be, for homework, is going to be to download this project, open it up, and then play around with the code in this area and get it to do different things. So how could you do something like I showed you before to make it go through all the colors of the rainbow? How could you, say, make it go through only different shades of blue? How could you, for instance, have one little block that just travels around the perimeter and goes in circles? How could you do that? Right? These are the kind of the questions you're going to have to try to think about. Let's do a simpler one. Let's say, how can I take this code and make it, instead of alternating between blue and white, how can I make it go between different shades of blue? It's a reasonable question, right? So right now, this code is kind of like, I can leave most of the stuff here. It's still going to, like, all this logic, these if-elses, that's going to make it move left to right, bottom to top. I still want it to do that. All I want to do is change it so that instead of making it all blue as it goes and then making it all white as it goes, it gradually shifts through different shades of blue. So first question is, how do I say different shades of blue? How do I say that in code, right? So far, we've just been using these words. I don't have like a light blue or a dark blue or a medium light blue. I can't just use the color words, right? I have to go back to my reference here and say, what other ways do I have to talk about colors? I've got these 4 different ways. I've got RGB, I've got hex, and I've got HSL. Any guesses as to, I spelled yellow wrong, dang it. Any guesses as to which one of these I might use to easily talk about different shades of blue? HEX is one way. It's actually going to be a little bit easier to use RGB. And HEX and RGB are actually kind of the same thing. They're just different notations for the same thing. So hex is actually still using the RGB scheme. It's just using these letters and numbers as opposed to the RGB syntax. So we're going to use RGB. So we saw before that RGB 00255 is bright blue, right? Let's just try an experiment. And one thing that I want you to do before you even try to like break any of these problems open is just to like tweak what's here already and play with it. So let's just play with it a little bit. So here, I'm just going to change, instead of saying the word blue, I'm just going to say RGB 00255 and prove to myself that that actually is the same. I can try. I don't use Atom that often, but we can. There we go. Is that better for folks? I can't do that much right now. I got these choices. Sorry. Yeah. This one, was it better light or dark? Any one, half dozen one, same the other? Yeah, those are the options I've got right now. So we did see, though, to pick it back up, we did see that changing the word blue to RGB 00255 gave us the same thing, okay? Something else I can change, and you can do this if you want, you can change the time between your ticks. Say, instead of ticking every 1/10 of a second, tick basically constantly. That's what 1 millisecond, which is really, really fast. Whoa. Yep. What's the delay between like the next time it lights up a block? It turns out you can. Yeah. Why later if you want. This says tick every 1 second. really slow. So yeah, 1/10 of a second is a good one. But you can play with that too. But this just playing with code is just a good way to see how it works, to see what's going on. So I changed this to blue. So let's go down here and let's just say, here's where I'm setting my color of a block. All right. What if I did something like, the next step? What if instead of specifying these things, get rid of my colors array, get rid of my colors index, and I'm going to say color val. It's going to be some number between 0 and 255 because those are the numbers I can put in for RGB, right? So color val, let me start it out at 255. Max blue. And then I'm just going to give myself some way to change this each time I go around. So I essentially want to be able to do like RGB 00 something, where that something is not the same every time, right? Because that's going to be some shade of blue. If I do RGB 00, the nice thing about text editors is they tell you when you screw up. There. 00128. Lighter blue, so it's no red, no green, and half of blue. Out. Yeah, there we go. Less saturated. So I can do like down, say, let's do like here. All right, so I want to be able to do this, but I want this slot to change every time. The third slot, I want it to gradually go from 255 down to 0, right? Or we can do it the other way around. Let's do it the other way around. That might be easier to think about. Let's start at 0. 0 up to 255. So it's actually going to start at 000, which is black, and gradually make it go up to blue. It's a dark, or it's a bright blue. So I want this value to change. So the way I can do that is, instead of kind of hard coding this string in here, let me cut it out. Say var this color equals something. I cut the string up. Do something there later. And then I'm going to insert my color val there. So I'm going to use a variable there. So now each time I go around, I have the string being set to the color, and I can change that RGB string is each time I go around. Okay. That makes sense. A way to change the RGB values. Okay, so let's do this. This having the color string, this is where I'm updating the color previously. This will update it every time it goes through the entire wall before it comes back to the bottom. If I want to update it every single block, I can go through the colors a little faster. I'll go down here. Say color val equals color val plus 1. I want to do just 2 plus 1, because of what if I'm all the way up at 255? That's the edge, right? So I want to do modulo 255. Go from 000 all the way up to 255. So it's not really, this one actually isn't different shades of blue. It's going like through the different saturations of blue. And so we'll just let this run, and we'll see it go from a sort of a very dark, from black all the way up to a pure blue, very gradually. It's almost so slow to be not that noticeable. Do you see that? Is that visible through the projection? Is it okay? All right, so now you can just play around with things. Now that we've done this here, what if I did something like, instead of changing the blue coordinate, what if I did something like changed the green coordinate too at the same time. So this would be like having the green and the blue coordinate be exactly the same and the red coordinate be 0 each time, right? So I would get things like RGB 0, 33, 33, for example. Okay. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Let's just see what happens. What do we see happening? What's different about this one? It's turning, rather than turning into a blue, it's turning into more of a teal. So that tells me if I mix green and blue, I get kind of a cyan teal-y color. Okay, so you can play around with these different colors and get different effects to happen here in different ways. So that essentially is what I want to encourage you to do. So with the rest of today, let me kind of go back and kind of show you what the project is going to look like in terms of doing it. With the rest of today, I want you to try to get this set up and at least running on your computer. That way the mentors and I can help you do that, since this is a new way of running JavaScript for you. You're not using Codecademy. This is going to be have a little bit more involved. And then at least run what I've given you and maybe try to start tweaking it if you get that far. Okay, so that's going to be the rest of today. So this is all on the course page. Let's see. Go to class 4 homework. It links to the actual page right here, which has like very detailed instructions on how to do everything and documentation about how to do everything. And basically, you're going to download this zip file to your computer. You're going to open it up, and then you can open up the HTML files in your browser, and then the HTML file also in an editor, and you can edit the code and then run it. Edit the code and then run it. And the different examples I encourage you to do or to try with, there's different gradients here. There's some that are fairly straightforward based on what we've done. They're just kind of slightly tweaking what we did today. And there's some that are really difficult compared to what we've done today. So I would say random or the blues one, we just kind of did this ourselves, kind of in a different way. These two are both the most straightforward. Vertical is also the most straightforward. These first three have you changing the way that the colors get cycled through. Random is to make every next square a random color. So that looks like this. Well, it won't look exactly like that because it'll be random, hopefully, but you get the idea, right? Kind of looks like Julie, kind of cool. Blues we saw, rainbow we saw too, is to cycle through the colors in sort of Roy G. Biv order. These all play with the direction of the animation. So you can, with just a few little tweaks in the right places, you can make it, instead of going left to right, top to bottom, you can make it go top to bottom and left to right. And that requires literally changing like 4 little things within the code if you do the right 4 little things. And then there are these two. These two are kind of tricky. So if you try out some of the others and you're having fun, try to do the traveling square that goes around the perimeter, or try to do the starburst, which is pretty cool. That's my favorite. And so, yeah, those are the things. So and if you have another idea for how to do it and you just want to try something else, go for it. The whole point with this is just to play around with JavaScript in a web page, to think about it, to be creative, give yourself some more practice doing JavaScript in this different way. I know it's going to be pretty challenging in terms of having a lot of new stuff around. There's like a lot of code here that you might not understand. That's okay. Ask us what it's doing and we'll help you. You know, trying to understand what happens with the set color function is interesting. It'll teach you something about JavaScript and web pages. So I understand that's like a new kind of mental challenge to get over, but this is generally the way you work as a web developer. Is you're given somebody else's big chunk of code and you have to work within it. So this is kind of more realistic in terms of how, as a programmer, you're going to do stuff. So any big questions before we kind of start trying to get this set up and run on our own today about what's going on here, what you should be doing? You okay? Cool. So take the rest of the time to get the project set up. Once again, just go to the project page. It has all the directions there, and mentors and I will walk around and help folks out. And just as a reminder, Monday, 5:30 to 8, we'll be here, and then we'll skip a Monday and then be back just for the regular Monday meetup every Monday after that. And you can always feel free to email me or email the hello world at launchcode.org with any questions related to this class, or even just like, what do I do next? When's the next CS50? Sign up for the mailing list. I'll send out kind of an update with all of those kind of details through Piazza. But just in general, don't be afraid to reach out to us about anything related to this class or anything LaunchCode or coding related. Okay, cool. Thanks, everybody.